to how God will guide me to speak today. That really warms my heart. So thank you. Rachel, I am a licensed marriage and family therapist for about 10 years here in Gwinnett County, working with building intimate marriages. And I have 2 children with colorful brains, right? I have an autistic child and a child with PANS, pediatric acute neuropsychiatric syndrome, which you may know as its partner of PANDAS, which is related to strep. So I have been married almost 17 years, and I love what I do. I love people, and I love to talk. So I hope you enjoy listening. I hope to make this interesting for you. I don't have a lot, or really any at all, of slides or anything to show you, but I do have a really interesting visual aid that might show up a little later. So you'll know them when you see them pop up. Okay, so I would love to open us up in prayer, if y'all could join me there. All right, Lord Jesus, thank you for setting aside this time as sacred in all of our lives. Thank you for giving us the focus and attention to be present today here with you. I ask you to guide my words and to open the hearts and ears of our listeners and help us to impact our community. Amen. All right, so I will sometimes throw out a question, I guess, if you all would maybe unmute and say, hey, that's great, but I'm probably going to do that maybe at the end. All right, so to start, welcome to 2020, where everything is upside down. Everything is different than what it was before. If you're planning Thanksgiving, that's a good reminder there that this year Thanksgiving may look very different. Now, for some of you, life hasn't changed too much, and I want to acknowledge that. And for some of you, you found really creative ways to connect, and that's wonderful. It puts a strain on us, all that flexibility and creativity, right? But if you just take a moment and think, what were you doing this time last year? You might, and I've seen a few funny memes about this too, so forgive me if you've heard this joke before. Pretty recently, it wasn't even maybe a year ago, we would all sort of gather around a table together without masks, with an unlimited number of participants, in an indoor environment, very close, maybe hugging and touching, all these things without any concerns. And we would maybe sing together, and we would maybe have one special person blow on a cake, put their spit on a cake, and then we would all eat it, all right? And that was a birthday party. Now, some of us still have that going on because of our creativity and flexibility and their risk assessments. That's fine, no judgment from me. But that's just a funny way to think about something very common that now we have to take a lot of extra steps to just think about potentially, even going to the grocery store, even have the energy to write a grocery list, all right? That is difficult, all right? I'm going to, like I said, acknowledge just how much flexibility and problem solving that you guys have been doing and how you're trying to meet the needs of people. So for some of us, that creativity and flexibility is not new to this pandemic time. Y'all have been stressed and thinking about risk assessment a lot before 2020. Certain populations, if you have a medically fragile child, for example, if you're going through chemo, or knowing someone who is, all right? If you're a disabled person, if you're a person of color, there's a lot of different levels of risk assessments that we all live with on a daily basis and have been living with prior to 2020. So I wanna say that for some of y'all, this is not new, but can you imagine all of that, then plus a pandemic? For certain special vulnerable populations, this has really put them over the edge, all right? And I'm seeing that in my practice. And I know that you're seeing that with some of the folks that you work with too, okay? There is a burden on our hearts and minds right now, and I hope to explain a little bit about the process in the brain of why that burden is and sort of what to do about it, okay? And I will say, if some of this life is better for you in a pandemic, great, lend that strength to others. Okay, some of you may actually be better off now because you've really grown and learned. Great, teach that to others, all right? But I'm gonna say that you're probably not the majority, all right? But maybe God is giving you some special gifts right now and you're using them, okay? Again, all the decisions that we're making weigh on us heavily. Some of us are unexpectedly homeschooling. That's fun. All right, or maybe some of you are related to teachers. Teaching right now is real fun, all right, in general. okay? And we live in a very heavy and polarizing time. I will allude to the fact that we just had a huge, very historic election, right? Where that decision was weighing on the hearts and minds of America, right? And so either today, maybe your candidate won and you're feeling some relief, or maybe your candidate lost and you're feeling some anxiety, or maybe somewhere in between. But that has been always in the background undercurrent in the midst of all this, right? And in an election year, that's kind of how it is for us as humans. So we need help, we need Jesus, we need to help others, and that's kind of why you're here, all right? Decision fatigue happens when we have just so many choices, so many more choices than our brains can process, okay? We have a finite amount of grace. We have access to the one, Jesus, that has all the grace, but we ourselves are human and our brains are limited, all right? So when we get mentally overwhelmed with information overload and physiologically overloaded, all right, that is called flooding, right? And what do we look like when we're flooded? Flooding is different for everybody, okay? You may be a person that gets flooded in sort of an explosive way, where everybody knows it if you're flooded. Maybe your face gets visibly red. Maybe you start to speak differently with a raised voice, right? Maybe you get aggressive, right? Maybe you are the opposite. Maybe you get flooded in a very internal way, and it's hard for others to read that about you because everything you're experiencing in that overwhelm is very inside. Maybe you go silent, right? Or maybe there's something in between. Very common responses can be like a sour stomach or a lump in the throat. Neck tension is huge. Chiropractors are making a lot of money right now, I think. And so there is so much to know about yourself of what do I look like when I'm flooded, right? What does my partner look like when they're flooded? What do my children look like when they're flooded? And for the specific population that I'm working with in my ministry, what do they look like when they're flooded? Which I don't want to overgeneralize, but there may be some commonalities, right? Some trends you're noticing. And it is good to sort of be aware that we will all demonstrate flooding in a different way, but we all get flooded, right? It doesn't make you weak. It makes you human with a mammal brain. And we're going to talk about the differences in a mammal and a reptile brain in a minute. And if you see me looking down, it's because my visual aid has escaped from his basket and he is wandering around the room. That'll make sense in a minute, okay? So sometimes when decision fatigue happens, all right, we do very clear behaviors, very clear patterns of behaviors, all right? Some people will tend more towards that avoidance and escape, all right? Avoidance and escape keeps you from facing the tough decisions, right? It may be that you push off those decisions on other people or start blaming people around you, all right? It's the school system's fault. It's my husband's fault. It's this, it's that. And we get very much in a position of disempowerment, sort of putting the power off on other people. And the point is that we are just having trouble facing and processing, right? Of course, avoidance and escape can also take the form of addiction, right? Can also take the form of hitting up those dopamine processes of sex, of overeating sugar, of gambling, so that we can just not feel for a minute. Alcohol, we can sort of numb out, right? Other people will tend more towards the impulsivity, right? They're so tired, they just don't have the wisdom or access to the wisdom, right? And they're going to just maybe do what feels good and feels easy. Like, let me just simplify this and make the easiest choice, maybe not the smartest choice or the wisest choice, right? You know, even doctors do this. Even judges do this. This is not an intelligence thing. This is a human thing, right? And we all will sometimes run on empty and not show our best, right? There was a really good study done in Israel, actually, where they studied judges and six male judges and 2 female judges. And the researchers looked at over 1,000 cases of parole decisions. So when prisoners were saying and asking for their parole to be changed or ended or something like that, just a review. And wouldn't you know it, that when judges were well rested and when they had the ability to make good decisions, they did. all right? They were able to rule more favorably or fairly in times when it was first thing in the morning, when they were fresh, right? Or after they had taken a break for eating lunch or something like that. So, long story short here, if you ever find yourself in court, try to schedule it in the morning, right? Or after a break. And then think about what that means for your own life. If you're truly trying to be at your best, obviously we need to pay attention to the fuel that goes into our body, but are we giving ourselves adequate breaks, right? We may, in pandemic times, have to make it a necessity for us, a priority for us to build in more frequent breaks, more frequent snacks. My children are taking full advantage of that now in homeschool, where they request 700 snacks a day and want to take all the breaks possible. So I don't know how they functioned in a typical school before when they did not have constant access to goldfish crackers. But okay, so here are some other classic examples that you might not realize are impacting you for this decision fatigue, right? Why do you think the grocery stores put impulse buys at the checkout, right? Why do you think they sell more magazines and chocolate bars and things that way, right? You have gone through so many mental steps to get to that checkout line. You have maybe made a grocery list at home even before you've gotten to the store. You've decided, should I wear a mask at this store? Is a mask required? What are the necessities here? On what is my pantry missing? What is my neighbor maybe missing? Should I pick up some for the co-op? All these kind of questions. And then you get in and you're hit with, well, how many toilet paper rolls, if toilet paper is in the store, and it is now. You know, toilet paper math is confusing math. Is it 12 super rolls? Is it 4 jumbo rolls? Is it 12? All these decisions about how to get the best bang for your buck. And maybe financially you're strained more now than you ever have been, right? And so your brain is taxed. How much fat and calories are in this? There's so many decisions. You get to that checkout line and your dopamine receptors are screaming for some sort of reward. They are screaming for an escape. They are screaming for something easy. And we lack the capacity in the brain to use our prefrontal cortex of wisdom and the Holy Spirit to say, does this fit in my budget? Is this going to fuel my body? Is this a wise decision? And what do? We grab the Kit Kat and we eat it on the way home and it's delicious, okay? No judgment, no judgment, okay? Some of y'all are about to feel called out here, okay? And you know, this also happens. How many of us have eaten cereal for breakfast in the last week? Or maybe kind of fed our children cereal. I'm sorry, cereal for dinner. That makes a difference to my point here. Cereal for dinner, or they've fed their kids cereal for dinner. No judgment, all right? At the end of the day, we don't have the capacity sometimes to make those decisions. What should I cook? The steps to cook it, all right? Here's a fun example too, and then I'll move on. When I had my daughter, I was set on her middle name. Her middle name was going to be Lucia, to honor my Cuban heritage. It's a beautiful name. I love it. Do you know how many decisions there were in that room when I gave birth? When do I get the epidural? Do I get the epidural? Yes, give me the epidural. And a million and one other things. By the time it came down to actually the birth certificate, somehow my wonderful husband got his choice in there. She is Alina Renee Willard. What? All right, decision fatigue took in, and I vividly remember the moment of being exhausted, holding my our special child, and James saying, my husband saying, all right, I'm gonna fill out the form. Alina Renee Willard, right? And I vividly remember in my exhaustion going, yeah, that sounds good. All right, that is the equivalent. That is the equivalent of reaching for the chocolate bar at the end of at the checkout counter, right? I was mentally exhausted. Later, it hit me about, I don't know, 24 hours later, I went, did I just sign off on not my name? What just happened, right? And of course, she's still Lena Renee today, all right? So again, I'm not shaming anyone here, all right? I just want you to reflect for a minute. As a helper in the ministry field, how is decision fatigue specifically affecting you and what you do, all right? How does it affect how you show up as a Jesus representative, right? I'm not going to open it up for questions now because we're going to move on, but some possible examples here Obviously, you can't pour from an empty cup. We know we're all tired, all right? But in the mental wisdom, prefrontal cortex strained area, all right? Maybe decision fatigue is impacting your ability to stay non-judgmental. Maybe we're kind of jumping to judgment sometimes a little too fast. Or maybe we're just our grace filter is not as present, and it's harder for us to choose our words with people, to stay calm and rational in stressful conversations or conflict, or to be flexible with creative solvings, even understanding how to meet needs. Maybe the needs are just so high, we feel like we can't make an impact, and so some of our old sort of self-doubt is creeping up about your purpose, right? And sometimes we can just get really rigid in, well, this always used to work before, right? And we are resistant to the novelty of new, because sometimes the novelty for new is just so tiring and requires so much more mental gymnastics, all right? But we need to resist that. We need to resist the rigid and keep moving towards the flexible. So in a perfect world, wouldn't we be helpers that had sleep and good nutrition and the right social support? And wouldn't we have all the things that allowed our brains to function perfectly? That'd be great, right? But what is realistic, right? We can try to get help for ourselves on the basics of eating and sleeping, right? We can do the things that we know scientifically that will put us in the right mindset, which 15 minutes of mindful practice, prayer, good stuff that just connects us to reality and truth can impact us, right? In good ways. Statistically, it will improve our decision making if we take those times to do them, right? So you're not broken if this is difficult. You're not alone. This is what humans do in these times. And we need to face that in ourselves and maybe ask for that extra help and trainings like this in order to be best, all right? Let's talk about brains for a minute, and then I'm going to show you my little friend who is crawling around on the floor, okay? Human brains are as unique as fingerprints, right? We have 100 billion neurons. Those are nerve cells that carry electrical impulses, right, in the brain. And there are so many countless pathways between them, right? Scientists examined a fruit fly, right? A tiny little fruit fly. And there's 100,000 neurons in the brain of a fruit fly, right? And they only looked at 25,000 of those. And they found, I think it was 20 million connections between those 25,000. So if there's that many millions of connection between just 25,000, how many more sets and combinations of pathways are there for 100 billion neurons? That's why we say that the brain is as unique as fingerprints. What makes neural pathways? Experiences. We all have different experiences, right? Some of this is genetic. The genetic pathways are different, and some of it, the pathways are formed through experience, like I said, okay? And of course, brain anatomy is important. We all have slightly different brain anatomy and the structural parts of our brains. And some of us have brain damage or challenges in the brain, okay? So, are you a lizard or are you a human? Please forgive me, I have to get something off the floor. I'll be right back. This is a lizard. This is my lizard. This is also my visual aid for today, who has been distracting me. He was supposed to sit happily in his little basket, and he decided instead that he would crawl around the floor. This is a bearded dragon, right? I love him. I'm sorry if he scares you. I promise he is not scary, all right? His name is Dash. His brain is underdeveloped compared to humans. Obviously, it's smaller, and it has different structures and different pathways, okay? He runs on a God-given instinct, right, to eat, sleep, defend himself, and mate, all right? As much as I think he loves me, I'm not sure he does. I think he just associates me with maybe food, all right? Or he associates me with safety, or he associates me with some of those instincts, right? And he knows through repetition and habit, which is kind of all he has, that if he comes near me, usually good things happen. If he comes near me, he doesn't need to activate his instinct of puffing out his beard. His beard will get bright black and big, right? Bearded dragons are native to Australia, and this is what they do if they feel threatened by another. He's a male, all right? If another male comes by, he's going to get himself big and he's going to puff up, right? I won't tell you what he does if he sees a female. I think you can guess, all right? So Dash has senses like us: sight, smell, touch, taste, hearing, all right, but not the ability for higher processing and awareness, okay? He can get overwhelmed, but he has very few tools to know what to do with that. If he gets overwhelmed by a bright light, his instinct is going to say hide, right? He does not have the creative flexibility like we do to be able to maybe turn off that light or make a different choice, right? And so this is very important to know that we are not lizards, right? And I know now you'll never forget that because you've met my little friend, right? Let's talk about then, I'm gonna put him in my lap. He's got sharp claws that are kind of connected here to me, and maybe he'll stay in my lap instead of wandering around the floor, okay? So let's talk about humans, all right? Humans are not slaves to instinct. We have choice, all right? Although when we're overwhelmed, I'm going to tell you why it feels like we don't have choices, and we can go into that sort of reptile or lizard-like state, all right, where we are just sort of primal and acting out of survival. As leaders, we need to be able to recognize when the people we're working with are able to sort of access their higher functions, and when they're not able to access those higher functions and they're stuck in those lower sort of functions. And really it starts with us. Are we able to stay rational and out of that fight, flight, flee, all right, in order to be there for others too, all right? So when we get our information from sight, smell, touch, taste, you know, little guy's walking around here. Put him on the floor. He wants to be on the floor. Okay, there you go, buddy. There you go. Okay, so we take information in through the limbic system, all right? We have the amygdala and the hippocampus that work together, all right? And the hippocampus accesses our memory banks of past experiences, all right? And the amygdala is kind of the regulator to say, is fight or flight necessary here? Is a threat here, all right? And so if there's a tiger in the room, right? Let's pretend my visual aid today had been a tiger and not a bearded dragon, although some of you might have had a fear response in response to Dash, okay? And I recognize that, and I'm sorry for that, all right? If there's a tiger in the room, the amygdala activates fight, flight, or flee, all right? There's no negotiating with the tiger. There's no higher functions involved with the tiger, all right? And it shuts down that prefrontal cortex, okay? And we kind of then will look lizard-like, all right? Because all we need to do is either get out of there or kill the tiger, all right? We're surviving, primal, all right? But maybe it's not a tiger in the room, maybe it's an apple, all right? As long as we're not deathly afraid or allergic to apples, all right? No traumatic memories involving an apple, all right? We're likely to be able to access our prefrontal cortex and decide what to do, all right? When we have information overload and we're constantly making risk assessments, right? Constantly trying to determine what's an apple, what's a tiger, right? Our brain loses the ability, just like a judge later in the day, we lose the ability to use wisdom, all right? And that's why our amygdala and our stress hormones get just too high, and we just have a harder and harder time to access the prefrontal cortex, okay? We will see things as tigers that aren't. We will see people as tigers that aren't, right? And maybe sometimes we'll actually see something dangerous and disregard it. You know, so it works the opposite way too, and maybe there'll be consequences of not seeing the danger. There's consequences of reading things as too dangerous too. I have to work to keep that perspective. Am I uncomfortable right now, or am I unsafe? There is a big difference, and if you are reading something as unsafe when it's really just something that's uncomfortable, you're going to miss opportunities to step into that situation and possibly bring peace to that situation, right? And obviously, if you're reading something unsafe as just uncomfortable, you might get hurt, or the people that you're trying to get help might get hurt. So it's very important to try to give your prefrontal cortex the best chance possible by being aware. Is it being shut down by flooding right now? Am I sneaking into fight flight, right? Or am I able to stay rational? And what helps me to stay rational? Sleep, eat, all those good things, right? Check in with yourself. All right, and again, we need those mental breaks that allow our brains to sort of reset, right? And that's how God designed our brains, right? God designed our brains to not just be in survival mode all the time. He wants to offer us those mental breaks if we access Him for that. And I want to talk now about the vulnerable populations, right? Because some of us are going to have a much, much, much harder time biologically. It's not going to be a spiritual issue. Maybe we're super connected to God, but the structures in our brain or our biology or our life experiences make it just really, really hard to latch on to God's truth and stay rational, right? This is not generally people's faults, right? It's not somebody's fault if their brain connections and brain wirings make them more vulnerable to being flooded, right? And some people just, let's face it, they face more risk assessment each day, right? They have a trauma background, or maybe all of that at once, right? And maybe they've never been even taught self-regulation skills. They don't know what fight or flight is, and they don't know what they look like when they're in it, right? And they're just burned out. So if the helpers are burned out too, we've got a lot of burnout, all right? All right, so vulnerable populations to look for here, and you guys might be in them more than you realize. I know you're on the front lines as ministry workers, so check, all right? You're already vulnerable, but maybe you're also some of these things too, or maybe your spouse is, or it's somebody close to you in your family, okay? And that you're empathetic naturally, and so that rubs on you, all right? So here we go, all right? Frontline workers, that's you, that's teachers, that's doctors, that's law enforcement officers, paramedics, military, firefighters, all right? Anybody who is just out there on the front lines in pandemic times is much harder. There's much more to think about, much more decisions to make, much more protocols to keep up with, all right? How am I gonna stay safe today? It's different than yesterday, all right? They might not even have the time now to stop and take a break, because it's just that much emergency all the time. Some of these people literally are in survival mode, and it's hard to then walk in the door of their home and see it as safe and see it as peaceful. So how are they going to bring peace into that if it's hard for them to even recognize their home as safe, right? Okay, so then financially fragile is another group, right? Small business owners really suffering right now, right? Having to switch up their whole business model sometimes, offer different products, deliver those products differently, right? And when you're financially fragile, whether you're a small business owner or not, maybe you've lost your job, right? Maybe there's food insecurity, housing insecurity, all right? Maybe they can't pay for the things that they were able to pay for before, like medicine, all right? Okay, medically fragile, I mentioned before, or the elderly. There's a lot of isolation in this group. So much isolation. I'm sure I'm not saying anything that you guys haven't already come across in the community. I'm just reinforcing that these are extra vulnerable. Okay, day-to-day life just got a lot more risky for grandma, okay? Let's see, I touched on people with mental health diagnosis, right? People with clinical levels, capital A anxiety, not just your everyday anxiety, all right? Capital D depression, not just your everyday low feelings, all right? Brain challenges like obsessive compulsive disorder, bipolar, sensory processing disorder. We can look on brain scans and see where in the brain is affected by those things. These are real. These are not choices. This is not weakness. This is biological. These folks, if they were coping really well before, maybe they were coping with things that have been completely taken away from them before. You know, maybe this sounds like a silly example, but for some people in those categories, going to maybe music festivals or accessing music, live music, was just life-giving for them. When was the last time that they've been able to do that, right? And so some of their coping skills, or maybe their access to medication and doctors, has just been gone, right? They're having to learn completely new ways to work on a brain that needs specific things and maybe sometimes can't get them, right? And they're feeling maybe a lot of guilt and pressure because, well, other people seem to be able to be flexible. Other people are doing this okay. Why can't I get it right? And so those are some very good things to be aware of in yourself and other people, and give extra grace for. And maybe the time for diagnosis of some of these things. Maybe they're rising to the surface now. And instead of denying brain differences, maybe let's see them and work with them. All right. Okay, so then to that end, specific brain challenges for the prefrontal cortex, what are those? It's me, your ADD folks, all right? ADD folks, we struggle with executive functions on a normal day, okay? So pandemic times, now trying to make a grocery list, go to the grocery store, think of all those steps. That was a little jumbled even before, all right? Now we're trying to do those things and also assess all this risk. Some of us ADD folks are kind of falling apart. All right, give us some grace. We're doing the best we can. All right, a little misconception about ADD. It's usually not that you can't focus at all. It's just that you're maybe focusing on everything at once. So hard to kind of distinguish what to do first, what to do second, what to do third. So if you've got a lot of information overload, a lot of decisions to make, like I said, the word there is jumble. Sometimes it can be a jumble. All right. Give your ADD folks, especially your ADD students, extra grace. And if you are ADD, maybe I've just given you a wake-up call for why this might be extra hard for you if you have not realized that before. All right. Autistic folks have a special place in my heart because my son is autistic. There's a tendency there for sensory overload on a typical day. And so then these pandemic times where all your routines that you relied on for security and safety are all uprooted. Routines being disrupted is very, very difficult for this group of folks. Okay. All right. I mentioned earlier people of color. COVID has disproportionately affected this community, and we need to recognize that. All right. And they may actually be facing discrimination in medical treatment and medical access. And so these are risks that the majority population may not even consider or think about. All right. We need to recognize that. Parents of special need children, hello, that's me again, right? We're tired on a normal day. You add pandemic and we're extra tired. There's so much for parents right now in general. That's another vulnerable group, right? Parents in general making all these school decisions. But then you add on top of that, how is my child's IEP even able to be followed with these new protocols, right? The very thing that my child requires in order to learn may just be impossible to implement right now. So, okay, let's go to the drawing board, right? There's so much to think about for your special needs children right now. Maybe their therapy centers are closed to the public. A lot of these therapies, occupational therapy, speech therapy, really poor translation to Zoom, all right? It's very hard when sometimes your access to in-person services is disrupted or just not possible, right? This makes a difference for your child's day-to-day functioning. And there's a lot of stress with that. Okay, and then of course those directly affected by COVID, right? Maybe you've lost a loved one. Maybe you're in the caretaking role for someone who is suffering. Maybe you're suffering. Maybe you have suffered. When to quarantine, how to quarantine. All right, this is an obvious one if COVID has come into your home, right? And then I mentioned before too, if you're a recovering addict, right? Maybe you had a really good plan for yourself, or maybe you're working with addicts that had just a really good plan for themselves to stay clean and sober. And now everything's different, right? Everything's different, and some old habits are starting to creep up because those plans need to be completely changed. Maybe, or maybe they don't have access to the coping skills that they had before. And the triggers are back. Stress, the triggers are back. The need for escape, right? And there are brain differences in someone who is a recovering addict versus someone who's never struggled with that addiction. It's a brain issue, right? Remember too, people under 25, your prefrontal cortex is not fully developed yet at all. So a lot of what we're asking our college age children or that subset of people to do to keep themselves and others safe is not really getting in there to process, the higher awareness and wisdom. They are not able to the degree that someone over 25 would on a biological level. And I don't think we do enough credit for that group just to say, it doesn't excuse you from trying to make good decisions. All right, but this is also part of your growing up and learning process. We need to instill some skills, practical skills in that group and hope they listen. All right, so all this to say is we need to simplify life for these people and for ourselves as much as possible. The best thing we can do is release some of this burden, right? If a process takes 10 steps, we need to try to simplify that down to 2 or 3 steps. We have switched to all paper plates in my home with no guilt or shame for that. Washing dishes is difficult right now, and paper plates, as much as I love and care for the environment and would have never used paper plates on a daily basis before, because that's just how high and mighty I felt about saving the planet. And that's probably a good choice, right? Now we are using all paper plates, and it's a great difference. Simplify, 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 all right? Do that for yourself, and try to think about, for the groups that you serve, what would make life simpler for them right now so that they have more access in their brain to save that brain energy for making some of these bigger decisions, right? That's where taking a meal to your neighbor is not just being nice. It's actually saving them brain power and energy so that they can focus on processing other stuff, right? Okay, so I'm gonna shut up for a minute, and I would love to ask, what are some of the best ways that you have found to support your brain right now and the brains of other people to help empower yourself and others to make good decisions, right? And then to wrap this up, I'm going to give you a way to talk about that with a sort of a metaphorical story, right? But so Rachel, help me out here. I'm going to make my screen big, I guess, so that I can see the people that have their cameras on. Hi. I've been talking into the void, really, but I do see some of you reacting, and thank you for that. Hopefully I entertained you a bit. Anybody want to jump in and maybe unmute yourself and tell me about what you found that helps your brain to access the prefrontal cortex and wisdom, and how you're helping your population that you're serving to do that? Don't make me bring out the lizard again. He's on the floor again. I'll bring him back up here.
Hi, I'm Angelina. I will say something. I have a daughter that has very high anxiety and has been having very hard time during this time. Yeah. And it has really opened my eyes to how her brain thinks differently than my brain does, and how you can't just say, oh, you know, just get over it or whatever, because that is not effective at all. And she had a baby during this time, and she was a school teacher. She actually did a really good decision and quit teaching school to help her brain, because it was overload, and she couldn't deal with it. She was just, and she's the type of person that tries to take care of everybody all the time. Yeah. And so it was really eye-opening to sit back as a mother and watch her go through this time and help her deal with it. But one of the things that I realized that's very important is one thing that you said: this is not something that anybody can control, and it's something that everybody deals with. So if we can just step out of our shoes and look at their situation, it's very easy to see how somebody that we're not going through the same situation that they are, how we're just like, oh, you know, just deal with it or whatever. And that just makes everything worse. So I'm glad to have this program, and glad to see that Renew is embracing this topic and dealing with, you know, how people, our neighbors are sitting there isolating. Some of them are, you know, living in strife, and everything is way chaotic during this election time. So I'm really glad to see how we can all come together and have a resource to get some knowledge and understanding on how to deal with this with our families.
Well, I am happy. I will talk about the brain anytime, and I want to thank you for what you are doing to validate your daughter's concerns, to not tell her this is all in your head, right? To not shame her for making the choices that she feels like she needs to do in order to maximize the energy and giftedness that God has given her to be effective, right? And sometimes you will see people in your lives, or maybe for you, making the tough choices to stop or to say no to good things. Our family typically participates with Operation Christmas Child in a big way. We typically do a packing party of thousands of boxes, just me and my family and my husband's job, and it is a blessing. We have packed over 5,000 boxes over the past 5 years, and it's amazing, and we love it. It broke my heart to say no to that this year. And it was because I realized very early on that I did not have the mental capacity to coordinate such a large effort. And so that is partly because I do struggle with anxiety. ADD is both a superpower and a challenge. And I'm trying to validate in myself that this is not a personal weakness, that I'm saying no to something, that this is a good thing, that I am re-energizing myself for next year and looking at that anxiety. Anxiety did not win this year. Anxiety did not shut me down. It's just how I've chosen to manage and show up in the ways that I can show up. And I'm thankful for some validating voices in my life. And you're one of those for your daughter. You're not blaming her or shaming her for her anxiety. There's a brain basis for it. So anybody else want to say anything else that you're doing for yourself or seeing in other people? Or maybe, I know we're coming to the end of our time, so maybe I'll just share my story here. But any trends that you're seeing in, or anything that you're doing to simplify? I like that too. I was going to suggest too, in your church marketing or your marketing of your programs, you know I'm not doing a good example. Sorry guys, I'm a Hispanic female. I use a lot of words. But use fewer words in your advertising. Use fewer words in your emails, right? Make your requests and demands on people right now shorter. Try to emphasize the ways that your ministries are going to make things easier for people, or you're trying to make things easy. Use a higher contrast of colors and bigger fonts or things. There's just a lot of ways that we can do this for ourselves. I like to clear my desk. Apart from my lizard wandering around, I like to clear my desk to just give myself a fresh, clean slate, because I know for myself, a lot of clutter just clutters up my already cluttered brain, right? So it's just everyday, day-to-day things that make a huge impact. And we need to know what those are for ourselves, right? And how to get out. If we are fight, flight, or flee, we need to have an escape plan for that and some accountability for that. You know, what do I do when I'm in that mode? How do I get myself out of it? And if I'm having trouble with that, how do I get somebody to teach me and coach me? You know, so that then I can show up for other people, right? Okay, anybody want to say anything, or should I teach you about spoon theory and then say goodbye?
Kelly?
Hi.
Hi, we're Philip and Sharon Stam. This is so timely for us. Yesterday morning, our neighbor across the street, her husband had foot surgery the day before, had to go off the Coumadin, and yesterday when she went in to wake him up, he was dead.
I'm so sorry.
And she said so many times, what do I do? What do I do? And
She's overwhelmed.
yeah, and so it's helpful. Thank you for the wisdom that you're pouring into us today, because I want to fix things. And just some of the things you said about just the overload and the sorting out something as simple as the meals. So it's like, hey, you take the meals over, can't you cook by herself? No, she can't right now. So thank you for that. I appreciate it. This is very timely.
I'm so thankful that you're able to translate this then into practical ways to care for yourself and others. That in grief, right, which is a lot of what people are feeling and have felt for a long time with this, and then of course in this instance in a very specific way, more so than a general feeling, right? We don't have access on a biological level to some of these things that people might think of as a choice. I really hate that positive psychology movement, or I think I'm labeling that wrong, but there's a whole segment of psychology and people that will just say, if you choose to do the right things, the good things will happen. And I always say, well, okay, there's truth to that. Yes, we do need to work to make right choices, but we need to also recognize when our capacity to make those choices is either biologically impossible, or at least at that moment, or it's strained in some way. And we need to give grace for people that really genuinely are probably trying to do well. Our grieving people are not trying to stay in bed, right? They are grieving. They don't have access to truth and wisdom that maybe your husband's in heaven and there's good things there. And how callous of us if we were to look at someone who is grieving and say, just access that higher wisdom that says he's fine and you're going to be fine. That's so invalidating of their current pain. We need to show up better and recognize that there is a time and a place. And sometimes there's a time and a place for survival mode. And there's a time and a place to learn how to get out of that in good ways, right? So thanks for showing up for her. Okay, so I'm going to give you something short and sweet here at the end, and I will, if you email me, Kelli@intimatemarriage.org, or if you ask Rachel for my information, I can send you the actual long version of this story if you want to read it. This is a true story that was created by a disabled person who is and now her statement, her kind of theory, her spoon therapy, is used very often within the disabled world in order to communicate just how much access to higher brain function we have at any moment, all right? And obviously this community is very special to me because I consider myself a tiny part of it, okay? ADD is not super disabling for me, but I understand. And then I have a child in that realm sort of too. And so I love that community. And I will use this to talk about myself. Okay, so long story short, two best friends who know a lot about each other go out to a diner, all right? Pre-COVID, all right? They go out and they're sitting across from each other and they're having a normal time. And sort of all of a sudden, one friend asks the other friend, you know, when the mood shifts and you get real, says, what is it like to live with lupus? Right? Lupus, if you're not familiar, is a very chronic, disabling condition at times and can be extremely challenging in a lot of ways, a lot of biological ways. All right? Impacts every aspect of your life. All right? And so the friend with lupus is sort of taken aback and thinks, well, surely this friend knows what it's like to live with lupus because I've had to cancel on her many times for going out because I haven't had the energy, or she's seen me struggling physically. She's been over to my house when I haven't been able to get out of bed, or, you know, whatever it is. How could she be asking me this? And she realized that she was asking on that real level of truly, what is your experience of this? And so sort of out of just because they were there, she reaches over, this friend with lupus reaches over and grabs a bunch of spoons off of the server's kind of station, right? So she has, let's say she's grabbed 10 spoons in her hands, right? And she goes through explaining that for someone without lupus, right? Let's just say a brain and a body that is functioning more optimally, perhaps, right? In a less disabling way. Maybe you have an unlimited amount of spoons, or you're able to access ways to get more spoons because you have access to flexibility, all right? And you have, and maybe you're in a very privileged position, right? Maybe you have money. Maybe you have, you're not worried about discrimination. You know, so there's a lot there. This is about ableism and, you know, a bunch of other stuff, privilege and things. So, so let's just say, for the sake of argument here, that the non-lupus friend has a bunch of spoons, right? The lupus friend says, yeah, I don't know on any given day how many spoons I'm going to get, right? Some days I start out with 0 spoons. Some days I start out, I've got 10 just like you. The difference is maybe I can't easily reach for more, all right? And difference is maybe when you get up and get dressed, it doesn't even take a spoon, or it only takes 1 spoon. When I get dressed in the morning, it takes me 3 spoons. It's physically exhausting. It takes a lot of mental energy to make the decisions. And there might even be some risk because I might fall or something trying to put on my clothes. Or, you know, the point is it takes spoons. And then she takes this friend throughout a typical day, all right, of examples of what takes spoons. And at times the friend expresses concern or surprise. Oh, that doesn't take my spoons. Or when that happens to me, I can replenish that spoon pretty easily. But you're saying for you, if that spoon's gone, it's permanently gone, or you didn't have it to start with, okay? And so the friend starts to cry as she's listening to what it's like for her best friend with lupus to just exist and try to do the best they can. And the friend recalls times where either she's jumped to premature judgment of this friend, or she's aware of how society jumps to judge. Well, lupus person, why don't you just choose more positivity? Well, lupus person, why don't you just choose to do better for yourself? Okay. And so there was a huge moment of empathetic connection between these friends. And there was now a movement, it's called sort of the Spoonie movement, all right, to be able to use how many spoons do I have today as a way to talk about your levels of energy, your access to those higher powers, and your ability to choose right and good for yourself, right? And so it's a good way to talk. How many spoons you got today? Do you have the spoons for this? Do I have the spoons for this? Is this something that I can choose, or do I need help choosing? Or is this something that I need to say no to because all my spoons were taken by 9 a.m.? All right. And it's a good recognition that we are not all on an equal playing field, brain-wise, body-wise, race-wise. There's a lot of differences in the amount of spoons that we have at any given time. All right. So do you guys like spoon theory? Do you think that you could use spoon theory? I love telling people how many spoons I have, because if we've talked about it, right? If they're recognizing, it's an instant, oh, I know where you stand. It's an instant ability to understand and assess kind of where that person is at. And then that person gets to decide, should I even ask this person? They've just told me they have zero skills, or zero spoons right now. Is it wise that I even ask or demand something from that person? What then do I need to do maybe to offer the spoons that I have to give? All right. So if you've got the spoons, help other people. All right. If you've got the spoons, if you don't have the spoons, get real with yourself and try to figure out ways to either get them or to accept that you're just running on lower than usual. All right. So you guys like spoon theory? Any comments, any final kind of closing thoughts? I took you over the hour mark. I'm sorry. Thank you for joining me on a Sunday morning. We are done. What do you want to say?
If you were to use the spoon theory, and I'm an ex-athlete, so you actually, for me, mentally, like you grow in the areas when you run low, right? You expend all your energies in your muscles, you rip your muscles, then you take a minute to grow. So I guess, is it okay to run on low on spoons, or do you just need to try to reserve your amount of spoons?
Oh, that is a really, really good point. And you know, I have zero athletic ability myself, okay? But I have worked with elite athletes, Olympic athletes as my clients. Obviously, you don't get to know who they are, and that is a very common tension, right? In sort of that athletic world and sort of our general worldview, all right? And I will just say that if you are able to be an athlete, you've got some spoons. Okay, and so if you've got the spoons, then sure, if it helps you to grow and you can see value in growth, then at times you can determine, is this unsafe for me to push through? And if it's unsafe, don't do it because you're gonna tear a muscle, right? But is this just uncomfortable and needs to lead me towards growth? If you've got the spoons to do it, you can process that choice. And you can determine how much running on empty, quote unquote, is necessary for me to push through the uncomfortable and get to that place where God wants me to really, truly grow. All right. In that case, you have the spoons to determine, do I want to grow or not? All right. But for someone that doesn't have the spoons at all, to even get to that higher processing, they're in fight, flight, or flee. They are having trouble determining, is this unsafe or uncomfortable? And so that's what I'm talking about. There are times if you've got the spoons where yes, you will need to push through some discomfort to grow. And that is actually the process of growth. You're absolutely correct. We tear the muscles slightly, they rebuild, they regenerate. I get that. And the athletes, their brain's a muscle. You know, it's a mental game for athletes, all right? Sorry that I didn't touch on that. I'm not an athlete, so it's not my natural. So I'm gonna go more towards like, hey, my brain is ADD and anxiety and I don't got the spoons. Right? So did I answer your question? Did I answer it? I'm just going to assume yes. Okay.
Yes, you did. Thank you.
Cool. And thanks for being an athlete. We need athletes in the world. You know, we need the athletic mindset in the world, but it's a problem if you put that athletic mindset on non-athletes or vice versa. Anybody else want to say anything, or how do we close? How do you usually end this, Rachel? Do we pray to end?
Well, thank you, Kelly. You did such an amazing job. I know a lot of people love this story, and so I will get the story from you to make sure that it's available to everyone. We'll send it out and put it on our Facebook pages and stuff. I know I learned a lot, just the takeaway of how can we make life a little simpler.
Yes.
Really helpful. So thank you everyone for joining us today. Kelly will stay on for a few more minutes if you have any more questions. Otherwise, we will see you guys soon. Thanks for serving with care. We're thankful for you guys.
Thanks.
Hey, Rachel.
Yes.
She mentioned her email earlier, but I didn't get to write it down. Will you include that with the
Yes.
story as well?
Yes,
Okay,
I
thank you.
I didn't leave. He was just trying to leave the room. So I'm here. I'm really here. Okay. So you guys are going to remember me, I hope, because I've got big hair and I've got a big lizard. All right. So, you know that I'm forming a memory in your brain today. That I truly am sorry. I know people have phobias of lizards and stuff. I truly am sorry, but this is kind of a part of me sometimes. And he doesn't always come out in therapy. He doesn't always come out, but I do use him when I speak sometimes. He's big, isn't he? Look at how fat this lizard is. I got him when he was a baby. He's big.
Oh.
So, all right. Well, I don't want to keep anybody. I see people dropping off, but honestly, if you have any questions or anything specific about what I do, or if you have, I don't know, anything, I'm here for a little longer if you want to ask.
Yeah. And we'll send out your email address.
Thank you, Kelly at intimatemarriage.org, KELLI.
Mhm. All right, awesome. Thank you so much, Kelly.
You're so welcome.
Have a great Sunday. Enjoy your day.
I will. Thank you very much.
All right, bye everyone.
Bye.